What is up, fellow sickos? We are back with what for Hardwood Knocks listeners will be the third of four podcasts going live this week. You can thank Mr. Mort Jensen from the NBA podcast fame, Yahoo Sports fame, Forbes fame, and Sports Illustrated fame, and most importantly, OnlyFans fame. How are you doing,
True.
Mort?
Very, very good. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Yeah, the OnlyFans thing is taking off. I think I have a view now, a single view.
It's just me watching it on a loop, is what it is.
Oh, so you're the one who I have to thank. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, it's a great tip, by the way. I really think that this is gonna catapult my career into the stratosphere. I'm really looking forward to it.
You're gonna be the first. Well, you won't be the first, but yeah, you might be the first person to visually combine erotica with your NBA analysis.
I mean,
Like
no
I've seen
one's really done
ASMR
it
NBA
before.
podcasts. I haven't seen any OnlyFans NBA podcast just yet. Just
Right,
more
right.
analyzing shit in the nude or shirtless. I'd fave it.
Oh man, I honestly, so we've joked around about this for like 2 months now, maybe even 3 months. There's a part of me that just wants to create an account now just to see if NBA coverage could even be sustained on OnlyFans.
You have to have a unique hook. Like everything
Right.
worth like it could be that, but it would have to be something just so outrageous that
Yep.
goes along with the NBA coverage, and there's a chance it might pop.
Yep. Yep. And the entire point is like I have to keep my clothes on. So like if I make a faulty analysis, for example, then I have to remove a piece of a clothing item. Yeah. I get
Well,
it.
speaking of items, we're going to
Right.
cover NBA trade rumor and news items. We didn't think the Suns Hornets trade, which we are about to tackle, was worth a full podcast. So we went through some other just noteworthy news items and we're going to react to them. Just your standard breaking down the latest NBA trade rumor and news items. Are you ready to dig in?
I am absolutely Nick Richards to the Suns. Of course, I am.
We begin with the Suns Hornets trade. So, the details for listeners, watchers, subscribers, whatever. The Hornets received Josh Okogie, Denver's 2026 second rounder, Denver's 2031 second rounder, Phoenix's 2031 second rounder. The Suns then received Nick Richards, Denver's 2025 second rounder, and they also, for the people who care about this, shaved more than $20 million off their luxury tax bill. Uh, General thoughts before we'll tackle it from each team's perspective, but general thoughts on this deal, Mort.
So the Suns, I actually really like this. I know that this is a team that's split the waters a little bit this season because they have been sort of disappointing. They haven't lived up to expectations. They don't really know, we don't really know rather what kind of direction they're leaning. Well, we know they want to win, but we don't really know whether that's feasible or not. We don't know if they're actually even going to be in the playoffs. But I think this does help them. They've needed size for a while. Like I had Gerald Bourguet on my podcast some months ago where we talked about like just the size issue, and he was like, yeah, they need to do something. They eventually need to do something because it's one thing to have Bradley Beal like helping out on the boards, but you can only ask so much from a guy who's 6'5". You can't ask him to come in and do stuff he's not inclined to do, and you can't ask a lot of those guys that. Now you finally add a 7-footer with strong rebounding prowess, someone who's also a rim runner, someone who can convert near the basket. You're finally adding that element. Now, do I think that they're done? I don't know.
They
I
better
think they
not be.
right. I do think Grayson Allen should be another one who's like might be out there as a trade candidate, and where again it's the focus is on size. But I love the push in here for a big man. I really do. I hadn't even considered the tax savings. Like I was so preoccupied thinking about Nick Richards as like a player, and that I didn't even take into account that they actually shaved off some tax savings. So good for them, or good for Matt Ishbia, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, like I'm not sure the fan base is going to benefit from that, but like Nick Richards, I think is good. I don't think a lot of people necessarily watch the Hornets a whole bunch, so I think he's going to come in a little bit under the radar. I don't think people necessarily understand who he is, but yeah, like the stats you're just putting up on the screen right now, they're good. He is a very solid defensive player, great rebounder. Like I said before, can finish in traffic, can finish near the basket, lob threat. Just 27 too. I kind of like the age that he is on. Like he fits the timeline that they're on. He's not too young, not too old. I think this was a very, very good pull for him.
Yeah, I think he'll be a good fit. Like you said, just the size, the contract fits. It's non-guaranteed for next year at 5 million as well. So that's probably something you keep unless he's just absolutely terrible or you've decided to blow the team up. I do think, he is going to be an actual transition and like above the rim threat, but he can't do much else on the
Right.
offensive end. I think he's probably, I've seen just some of the responses I've seen. Some people are just like, well, he's not a good screener. I think he's good enough as a screener. He's been in the 83rd percentile or better of screening talent per B-ball index the past 3 years. He is this year 95th percentile of rim contest per 75 possessions, and then the 85th percentile of points saved at the rim per 75 possessions. If you're just into the more baseline stats, opponents are shooting 56.4% at the basket against him. The caveat here would be, even with all of the injuries that Charlotte has suffered this year,
Mhm.
he plays against a lot of backups normally. And so if
Yeah,
the
that's true.
plan is to start him in Phoenix moving forward, I'll be very curious to see how that works out. I still think offensively he should be fine, and maybe even defensively, because I don't think, honestly, I think that the Hornets have probably needed him to try, and I put try in quotes, to like help out and cover other things up more than Mike Budenholzer will have him. Like, I don't know if the Suns necessarily have the talent to where they can ensure he's not hung out to dry, but I don't think Mike Budenholzer is going to try and overtax him by having him do a bunch of stuff on the
Right.
perimeter. And I do think, when it comes to like screen navigation and stuff as a big, he's probably okay. That will be interesting to watch. But just as a base big who gives you an element on offense when you're just looking at the finishing, the transition, like Mason Plumlee and Yusuf Nurkic aren't doing shit for you in transition. And I know the Suns don't get out in transition a ton, but he is someone who will, because when he's going a straight line specifically, like he will beeline down the floor. And so I think that will ultimately be good for them. Is it
Mhm.
something that's going to shift the tenor of their season or give them a more stable defense? I honestly don't know, because like the bigger
Right.
impact might be, okay, now you have functional size, I'll say defensively at the 5. And I know Yusuf Nurkic's rim numbers have been pretty good this year, but like pretty much everything else on the defensive end for the
Yeah.
most part, not going to give you a ton. And so maybe there's a
No.
trickle down effect of having that baseline defensive competence and size at the 5 will then make life easier on everyone else. And then even trickle down and spill over into, okay, your secondary units, like it gets easier to flesh those out.
I'm wondering, the 83rd percentile or better in screening talent. I think this is the first time I've been exposed to screening talent percentiles. What does that entail? Is that people who've scored immediately after receiving a screen from him, or
I'm pretty sure I'd have to
okay?
look at the glossary, but it's gonna factor in contact, the separation rate, and it like goes beyond just the screen assist.
Oh,
So
like the separation. Okay, that's
it's gonna
interesting.
be,
Like
I
it's
think it's
a little
just
bit more
basically volume and effectiveness kind of combined
right.
into one of those screens. Again,
Nice.
though, he's going to look, if he's predominantly playing against second units,
Hmm.
that's it's easier for him to kind of stand out. Like as a backup big, Nick Richards is really good. As a starting big on a team with, let's just say, playoff aspirations, even not even championship aspirations at this point, we'll have to see whether that is a stretch or not.
Well, I mean,
I
they're already starting a backup big, so
They've started. I think you could argue that all of the bigs they've started should be backup bigs.
that's what I'm inferring. Yes, I mean, there's a
It,
reason Yusuf Nurkic is only playing 23 minutes per game.
I,
You can't warrant more.
it was really funny in their game against the Hawks the other night. I can't remember which member of the Hawks broadcast it was. I think it was Bob Rathbard said Yusuf Nurkic has just disappeared. He was in the rotation one day. He's just not in it anymore, and he knew it, but like he said it just with like in such a revelatory tone. I ended up laughing out loud while I was hearing it, but like that's kind of been a microcosm of their season. It's
Yeah,
just like they've dealt with some injuries for sure, but like they're clearly just they moved Bradley Beal to the bench. They're leaning on
right.
Oso Ighodaro more. Like they're clearly just searching for something and some semblance of consistency. And again, I think as someone who's probably going to play 20, 25 minutes a game for them, and if he's playing 30 plus minutes, it's probably because he's doing a pretty damn good job. That this is a nice get. I am curious though, and I think this kind of bleeds into the Hornets' perspective of the trade. How do you feel about the cost of getting Nick Richards for the Suns, where it's okay, you're getting a second rounder back,
Right.
but you gave up 3 second rounders that all profile is better as like Denver's
Yeah.
2026 second profiles is better than their 2025 second, I would think.
Well, I mean, look, that's the price of business at this point, and it's also the price of getting better. This is a team that can't really hide its cards, right? Like they can't keep anything close to the vest. Everyone around them knows they're going for it this year. You have a 36-year-old Kevin Durant, you have Devin Booker, you have Bradley Beal. The time is now. Like the time is not 3 years from now. So the jig is up. Everyone knows that they're in it right now, so they can squeeze everything they want to basically dangle that carrot in front of Phoenix and say, look, you can get better, but it's going to cost you. Whereas other teams might have the benefit of playing it a little bit coy and saying, well, we can go one way, we could go another way. Maybe that's going to help us a little bit in our negotiation tactics. Whereas that is just like, if the Suns try to negotiate or try to hackle, people are like, no, you cannot afford to hackle right now.
Right.
You're going to have to pay to get this upgrade. And frankly, when you're as committed, and I do take my hat off for Matt Ishbia in that regard. Like I know that we all think that what he's done is a little bit crazy, and I think the vast majority of NBA fans and pundits wouldn't have done it the same way. I do take my hat off for him just saying, screw it, let's just go for it, whatever it takes. Like that is probably the mindset you'd want to have if you're a fan of a team and that's how your owner act. Now, then we can talk all day long about whether he should be taking advice from Isaiah Thomas. That's a different debate altogether. But he probably shouldn't. But I do appreciate this, and the fact that he's willing to pay to make it happen. Look, I respect it. I respect
Look,
it.
in this
So
case, he saved to make it
he
happen.
also did that. Yes. Again, I didn't even like. This is the first time that I actually registered that. So he also paid to save at the same time. He both gained and saved in the same deal, and that just took 3 somewhat high end potentially seconds. Would you give that up to both save on the bottom dollar and then get a guy in who can help you? Yeah, I probably would. I don't think it's egregious in any way.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think generally we over romanticize second round picks. And so from Charlotte's end, though, I think this is good. Like getting those picks, upgrading, well, let's say they upgraded 1 round picks and then they just get 2 distant seconds outright from teams that might not be good at that point. I think that's a good piece of business. And for me, I think it also kind of reinforces that, all right, this regime, maybe they've been forced into it again because of injuries this year, but they are focused on the bigger picture. And so there's just
Yeah.
no sort of disillusions about what's going on. I do wonder though, you kind of look at their big man setup now, and it's, do you interpret this as a vote of confidence in Mark Williams staying healthy? Is it just they want to give Musa Diabate more run? Are we about to see some truly funky ass lineups from the Hornet? Maybe some Tijon Salon at the 5 more often. They're not at a point where they should care about that, but I'm wondering if, like, what is the offshoot of, okay, they traded a big for a wing, and that's a trade you would typically make in general, and they were
Yeah.
compensated well for doing it. They also, this is per Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype. The Suns wanted them to take on Nurkic and then send them Cody Martin along with Nick
Mm-hmm.
Richards. And Cody Martin is available per Scotto, so every team should be trying to get him, in my opinion. But this also kind of reinforces that, like, you're not. There was some reporting that maybe the Suns could get off Nurkic's money using seconds. That's not happening. Clearly,
Nope.
that's another
Nope.
takeaway from this.
I will say this much. I wrote a reaction piece over at Yahoo for this trade, and at no point did I factor in the on-court product of the Charlotte Hornets after this trade. That was just not that important to me because I don't think that was the motivation. Well, actually, I'm kind of lying because I did basically say that Josh Okogie is going to help them in terms of instilling a defensive
He
culture.
should
I think,
play. Yeah.
yeah, he should play. I think for him, it's about installing a culture next to Josh Green, who defensively is also quite solid. And I think the hope is to sort of install something in LaMelo Ball because it wouldn't hurt if LaMelo became a better defender. Is that the
Oh,
polite phrasing?
would it hurt him? Like, would he be tired? What's the?
That's yeah, right. That's a different equation there. But Mark Williams, I think, has played phenomenally. I mean, we're recording this on Thursday, January 16. I think it was last night he had 31, right? A career high as well. Like giving him more touches, more minutes, it's fine. Diabate, I'm down with him too. Like, I don't think this is a big loss for them, even though Richards was a perfectly fine backup for him, and I think highly of him going to Phoenix. This team wasn't going anywhere. Remember before the season, everyone was like, oh, Charlotte, that is the deep sleeper. They're going to come for you this year. They could make the
I don't
playoffs.
know what you're talking about. As someone who was one of those people, I have no idea
Yeah,
what you're talking about.
I was not one of those people, and I felt like I was literally in the twilight zone of one of those episodes in the mid-90s. Like, what the hell is happening around me? Who has smoked something that I have not been offered yet?
I
Like, what
thought
the hell?
I basically flip-flopped. Like, I assumed that Charlotte was going to be what Detroit is right now, and I kind of just assumed that Detroit would need another year before they could hit the
Right.
accelerant, and I was clearly wrong about that. And this is
I was not there. I was not there. So the fact that they've lived up, so to speak, to my expectations of being extremely bad, I just don't think what they got back right now factors in much to this season. For me, it's just about, can Josh come in and install that defensive culture, and they get the 3 seconds. That's what they took away from this. Perfectly fine.
And by the way, that's with like Nick Richards missed a ton of time with, didn't he have like fractured ribs or something earlier this year? So to still get like what they did when he
did miss
missed so much time.
I don't remember.
I
Like,
think it was a rib
diagnosis.
injury, if I remember
Okay.
correctly. But to your
Yeah.
point about Okogie, not only should he play, I would argue that you can make a case for Josh Green or Brandon Miller, but once you factor in kind of screen navigation and the breadth of positions that he can defend, I think he's probably their best perimeter defender on the roster right now.
Yeah. I don't think that's unfair. Yeah.
There's another element of this, though, from Phoenix's end that I wanted to talk about. They only have 2 tradable picks at their disposal now, that 2025 Denver second and their own 2031 first. More descending all these seconds out. This is a stupid way to phrase it. Does it kill the Jimmy Butler dream? Just because those were things that they could include to help make any package, assuming Bradley Beal waived his no trade clause and whatever team was taking him, like those were sweeteners they can include that were now gone.
All right. So here's the thing, and Miami fans are going to hate me for it. And I also wrote this in one of the trade column that I did over at Yahoo. I don't think you should fork over a first for Jimmy Butler right now because of everything. He's got that player option, which he can threaten to just not pick up, and then he can be a rental for a team that is lacking in assets, and where, frankly, I don't necessarily think. Well, he'd be a good fit to an extent, but he's not a floor spacer. And you just don't know whether his motivation right now is about securing the next contract or where his head at. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say Jimmy Butler's only cares about money. I'm not going to say that. I don't know what his motivation is. But if I'm Phoenix, if I'm Milwaukee, whatever team out there, and I'm trading for Jimmy Butler and I'm not fully aware of where he is mentally, where if is he motivated to come in and help me win a title? Is he at 35 still the Jimmy Butler who we've seen in the playoffs before? Like, I just have so many freaking questions around Butler at this stage that I just wouldn't dare give up a first. So if the Phoenix Suns are somehow open to relinquishing their first round pick, I think that automatically puts them ahead of the queue in terms of being able to get him.
That's interesting. I would absolutely give up a first round pick for Jimmy Butler, especially in Phoenix's situation. But I guess to your point, though, and I will say Bradley Beal, whether he'll waive his no trade clause and will Miami or another team take him, that was always going to be the sticking point. So I don't view this as, oh, the Jimmy Butler dream is dead.
Right.
I do wonder, though, like, could they send, I've asked Grant this, I'm curious what you think. Could you get a first round pick for Oso Ighodaro or Ryan Dunn? And so what I'm thinking there is, let's say you trade Ryan Dunn. Is there a team that gives you a late first that's maybe this year or in 2026 that then you attach to Bradley Beal, and that gets the Jimmy Butler package done, whether it's from as an alternative to the 2031 first? Because maybe we'll find out that Phoenix didn't want to give because Butler, they don't have to worry about Butler leaving like I think some other teams would. And I also think that wherever Butler goes, you trade for him knowing that you have to pay him. And I think he's just going to go where he's paid. Whether he agitates for out a year later or something, we would have to see. But I think more so they were at the top of his list, apparently, when this whole saga started. So I don't think they need to concern themselves with that. But I'm wondering, just because you're so low on it, and that I do think Miami might have a little bit more leverage than Jimmy himself at this point, but neither party has a ton of leverage. like,
Right.
would it be more palatable to say if we could get a late first round pick for Ryan Dunn and Osagadar, like we trade those picks instead of our 2031 first attached to Bradley Beal to get the deal over the hump? Or is this just is that too ambitious when looking at the value of those two?
No, I mean, again, if you have an idea where a pick is going to land and it's like an immediate pick and all right, it's probably going to be in like the top 25 or something, all right, then you can probably persuade me to include it. What I wouldn't do is like fork over an unprotected for Jimmy at this stage. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here and saying that his talent level, Jimmy Butler's talent level, isn't worth a first round draft pick. It's worth multiple. That's not what I'm arguing. I'm arguing the construct around it. Basically, you have no idea how long you have him. You have no idea if he's going to get pissy with you. If the contract you're offering him in the summer is below what he's expecting of you. Like, I just think there's so many moving parts here where if you're relinquishing a fair bit of your future asset trove, you might end up looking really bad in about 6 months time unless you win the freaking title. Like, this is such an all-in move for the Suns that I can respect it if they go that route, but if they don't win the title, it's going to look horrid. Absolutely horrid. So again, if you're forking over something that's like a 25, 28 overall pick in this upcoming draft, sure. Like, yeah, I can, or in that ballpark, fine. Relinquishing an unprotected 2030 first, that could be ugly. They could be forking over there a
I
major piece there.
I think the problem there with the Suns specifically, I agree that they could be forking over a major piece, but for me, it's two layers. You and I think subscribers, listeners, not that we overrate, but we assign a ton of value to these distant firsts because of everything you just said. Where the Suns going to be in 2031, that pick's going to be a gold mine for whoever has it. Whichever front office trades for that pick right now is probably 90% almost assuredly not going to be the front office making or using that pick. And so I wonder if these distant firsts, they look good when they're attached to other immediate assets, which is why I've wondered, could you turn Dunn into a first round pick and then attach that where then Miami's like, oh, we'll take Beal because we're getting 2 firsts and one of them conveys this year or next year. So I've wondered about that. And then the other thing here is I think people are too low on Bradley Beal as a player. We conflate player values with their contractual numbers, which to some degree is fair, but people are kind of acting like he's some bum. If you put him on another team and maybe in a role that he's more fitted for, which is to be more central to the offense than he is now, I think he'd be really good. And you could argue there's only 2 years left on his deal more. That's not a lot of time. So why aren't there more teams willing to roll the dice on him? That no trade clause is paralyzing. And we're seeing it now in real time play out with the Suns. And so that also is part of the compensation in this case that you would be sending to Miami to me is that they're accepting because Bradley Beal has no reason to not just waive his no trade clause to leave Phoenix, but to negotiate the no trade clause out of his contract. Like there's just no incentive for him to do that.
I think there is some level of skepticism around Beal that is fair, and I think there is some of it that's, like you said, extremely unfair. And the unfair part is when you evaluate him exclusively through the prism of his contract. Yes, that is faulty. I do think it's fair to wonder, like, is Bradley Beal's 3-point shooting an outright asset? Because like he's had years where he's been just a knockdown 40% shooter. Then he's had a stretch of like where he went 6 years before that where he was even slightly below average. And then suddenly his volume started declining. He became a little bit more happy from the mid-range area. And you started kind of realizing, oh, his shot profile isn't always fantastic. Like the saving graces for him has always been, I'm capable of getting to the free throw line as well. So if I'm not hitting from the outside, I can attack the rim. Well, that component of attacking the rim, that has fallen a little bit because he's 31 after all. That's not going to get better as he ages. So I think there are some teams that fully recognize who Bradley Beal was and are asking questions in regards to who is Bradley Beal right now on a different team, of course, where he's the starting shooting guard and getting a prominent role. But is he still the Bradley Beal who averaged 28, 30 points, from the Wizards back in the day? Or are we seeing a guy who's probably more along the lines of like 22, 23 points per game with with a worse shot diet? Those questions I think are fully legitimate and those would be real concerns. But that said, I absolutely agree with you that people who are painting Beal as a bum just don't get it.
Yeah, and it's tough because he kind of feels like the consummate. Is he more comfortable and maybe and definitely in certain seasons he's been more efficient generating his own shot rather than playing off others or being more of a catch and shoot threat. And so even if he
Right.
might be more efficient, can he do it in higher volume as a secondary option? And I think that's a fair criticism. I really think though the most damning thing about him is the no trade clause. Like
Yeah,
if
agreed.
Bradley Beal didn't have a no trade clause, I would go as far as arguing that Jimmy Butler might already be in Phoenix.
Mm. Yeah,
So
I think that's a perfectly reasonable take. By the way, I also forgot to mention just the availability. Can we also not? I think can we agree that for Bradley Beal as well, that's also
he's
sort of a
he's one of those players, unless I'm misremembering any like real chronic issues. I think he dealt with some knee stuff at some point, but it's
yeah.
like the Anthony Davis of nothing is necessarily a serial offender in his body, but these like injuries just continue to pile up.
Constantly. Like again, if we look back, the last time he played 82 games, he was 25. Right now, he's 31, and since then, it's been 57, 60, 40, 50, 53, and then 29 this year. It's like yeah, like that. You have to factor that in nowadays with the restrictiveness of the new CPA. Player availability has become more crucial than before. You want if you're paying guys 40 to 50 million a year, you want them to be able to play for 70, 75 games at least. You're not satisfied with a 55 game season.
We do have actual Jimmy Butler updates, and this is kind of twofold. But the latest on him, according to ESPN Shams Charania, he met face to face with Pat Riley and reiterated his trade request and said he won't sign another deal with Miami.
So where are the news?
Right. That the Jimmy Butler updates are kind of the same. The
It's all the
Heat are
same.
still reportedly remaining patient, and that's why I'm asking you, which I think will spill over into our next angle to tackle. Have we reached
Mhm.
the is there a Jimmy Butler dark horse out
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
of the situation? Like, sort of have we reached that point of the discussion?
Yes, and I actually, a couple episodes ago, we talked about this when we had a Heat segment. I wasn't kidding when I said that in some alternate universe here, there is a challenge trade between the Bulls and the Heat. That's basically Zach LaVine for Jimmy Butler. Like you're laughing, but like again, if you look at it from Chicago's point of view, it's a former Bull. He's a big name. This is what they kind of want to do, right? They want to sell the fan base on something. And Zach LaVine, they've been trying to trade him forever. He's ridiculously underrated. He would be a talent injection for the Heat, who are trying to make the playoffs this year to avoid forking over the unprotected pick in 2026 to
Which, just to be
OKC.
sure, is the
Yeah.
opposite of what the Bulls should be doing.
Absolutely. And look, I'm not taking what the Bulls should be doing into consideration because I've done that for years, and they're not listening. They keep doing things that are completely illogical. But I do think that type of trade is in there. I absolutely guarantee you that because of who the Bulls are, they've had this conversation internally. They've had a meeting about this. I guarantee you. I guarantee you. I mean, why wouldn't they? From a PR perspective, from a fan perspective, like from an engagement perspective, look who's back. The tagline writes itself.
I will
I
just
mean, look,
laugh.
you're laughing and I get it, but like, you can't tell me that from a Bulls perspective, this wouldn't be considered.
I guess it could be. And I mean, worst case scenario, or is it the best case? Like he might be an expiring contract technically, but there's just something that is nonsensical about the idea of, okay, so next season, the banner in Chicago is a recently re-signed Josh Giddey, a
Mm-hmm.
36-year-old Jimmy Butler or
Yep.
whatever on a new max deal, and then Nikola Vucevic. It's just like, what are we doing here?
But like, what have the Bulls really been doing since 2021? What have
Also
they been
fair.
doing? Yeah, I think it is, and like that's why I'm pushing back on this because people like try to make sense of what the Bulls are doing, but you have to factor in this current management. They are handcuffed from the perspective they're not allowed to rebuild. They're not allowed to go all in, like relinquish all their future assets for a star. They're basically being asked to make moves within some level of margins. This kind of fits that bill to a T.
Is there any well, I'll ask you this after we talk about the next team that I don't know
Yes.
if I don't think they're a dark horse any longer. They might be the favorites, but the
Mm-hmm.
Milwaukee Bucks. So this first to note, they are in the second apron, which means they can't aggregate contracts, but you can
Right.
aggregate contracts if the deal gets you out of the second
Yep.
apron. And so they are
Yep.
6.5 million roughly above the second apron. Per Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype, they are looking to move Pat Connaughton, who he has a $9.4 million player option. That's about his
Right.
salary for this season too. But for next season, that before we get into the Jimmy Butler stuff of it all, and the report is this comes from Sam Amick of The Athletic that Jimmy Butler is willing to go to Milwaukee. I wonder how
Mm-hmm.
much of this is the initial rumor about him not wanting to go to Milwaukee was wrong versus, oh, okay, the Phoenix thing isn't happening, so I'm slowly expanding my list.
Right.
That being said, from the Pat Connaughton perspective, because whether it's a three-teamer or an independent trade just to get the Bucks out of the second apron, like, can you get off of that final year of his contract? Like, is Detroit taking seconds back to absorb Pat Connaughton?
It's so funny you asked that because when I signed up for Blue Sky and started getting active there, that was one of the first things that I started talking to people about it because like that we were just starting that side up like from a basketball perspective, and everyone was trying to get conversations going. This was one of them, and the debate came up whether what would it take for the Bucks to get off Pat Connaughton, and like a lot of fans were like, probably a couple seconds. Some other people were like, no, that's not enough. You have to give up like a future first to get off of him. I don't know what the answer is. I do know that no one around the league is going to look at Pat Connaughton as an asset. No one's going to be looking at Pat and going, "Oh yeah, we'll take him on as a player and put him immediately into our rotation. That's great. What a get!" Like that's not the way the teams are looking at it. So the vast majority of what they have to relinquish probably has to go to that third team to take on Pat Connaughton, which leaves them with less assets for Jimmy. But like I've said, and maybe I'm just too low on the whole situation, I wouldn't relinquish a first for Jimmy regardless at this point. I'm just too worried. But also, like I'm a safety nerd when it comes to that. I wouldn't have the balls to do it, which might be why I'd make a horrible GM. But we'll see. I mean, I think that is where they have to pay like the real value stuff, though, is to get off of Pat Connaughton and not in terms of providing Miami with a legitimate asset for Jimmy.
And look, I believe they only have one tradable second round pick. They just have both of their 2031
Yeah.
picks, I
And
believe.
that's not enough to get off Connaughton. I'm sorry. It's just not.
You would need another team to not even Marjon. You can't attach Marjon Beauchamp there. You need them to like. You didn't have to be willing to include Andre Jackson or maybe a team like or AJ Green. So maybe it's
Mhm.
AJ Green in that second, like that type of deal. And then at that point, now you're giving up like chunks of your rotation because any Jimmy Butler trade, the math that works right now, unless something substantially changes, Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis, and Pat Connaughton to a third team. And then that 2031 first is the framework. And you probably need to include that second. I guess what you're hoping from there is that then can the Heat attach other, and they're not, by the way, Pat Riley like views second round picks as just dog shit. Like at this
Right.
point. So the Heat, I don't even know how many they have some seconds that they have the Lakers second next year. There's a swap that's going on with Indiana. So they could probably include another second or two. And the thinking there for them would be okay, like Connaughton then isn't on their payroll, which he like theoretically couldn't be because of their own cap situation, but you are getting the Bucks's 2031 first. And so are you willing to send out your own 2031 second or that Lakers second and then just 2 seconds? So like let's just in theory, the Lakers 2026 second and the Bucks's 2031 second to Detroit for like to take on Pat Connaughton's money. Is that like are we closer at that point or is that still not enough? Because by the way, the other part of this,
Yeah,
Detroit is good. So
they
from
are.
their perspective, what's the value in helping Milwaukee get better? Now, I think you could just go around the league and say, is there a team with a trade exception large enough or they're non-taxpayer mid-level that they would still take Connaughton in for? You could work it with a game it with some smaller contracts. But like
Mhm.
in a vacuum, are those seconds, a Lakers second in 26 and a Bucks second in 2031, is that enough to take on a year of Pat Connaughton? I think we're
It gets
close.
yeah, it gets you in the door in terms of having a conversation, and I think you are making a real offer, right? Like it's not, let's try to like hoodwink you into this one. Like it's a real offer. What it comes down to is also the awareness of other teams knowing full well that the Bucks need this to happen in order to get Jimmy. We'll just say no. Like, you need more. You have to go out and find more. You have, like,
Or
it's
it's
not our
it's
problem.
again, it's AJ Green or like
Yeah.
Andre. Like those
Right.
would probably be the two players they have where other
Yeah.
teams might be, oh, them in a second or
Yeah.
seconds. Like now we're talking.
Here's what I think a lot of fans don't understand as well. When teams are trying to be looped in as a third team to make something work and they're not the beneficiary of getting like the star player, they are going to squeeze the ever living hell out of whatever they can, because it's teams that come
Unless
to
you're the
them.
Pistons of the 2024 offseason.
Right. Yes. Correct. Correct. There are exceptions, and it's also, look, I'm not even kidding when I say this. I'm guessing very much that's why teams are trying to loop in teams historically that are bad negotiators as well. But like, teams that are good negotiators will say, "Oh, you want us in as a third team, but we're not getting one of the key pieces involved in this trade. Fine, we'll help you out. You came to us, so that means we'll ask for something else that is juicy, that is delicious, and it's not going to take up something of ours. Like, we might be able to rent out our cap space, but that's going to cost you 2 or 3 seconds, even though it does makes no difference to them. So if they're looping in a third team, I would need that third team to be the right team who like are unaware of the leverage they have in
Or
such conversations.
or is it something like, I mean, and it would have, you'd be towing a fine line here, but so like look at Houston as an example, where
Right.
maybe in their heads they think that this is all going to blow up in Milwaukee's face. They want to fast track the Giannis trade request so they can be involved in that. So they're going to offer to take on Pat Connaughton, and they will send out one of their small, like they have all these quasi
Right.
expiring contracts, but and they have a ton of flexibility within the new matching rules too.
Yep.
So it's, can you make it cheap enough, like for the trade with Miami and Milwaukee to work? And then in your head, it's all right. We get a couple extra seconds, and we made the Bucks better this year, but we're get in theory, but maybe this
Right.
blows up in their face, and they've gotten rid of their 2031 pick, and now Giannis is going to be available. And hey, look, we've got all these assets.
Yeah.
I don't want to say I hope teams think like that. I know they think like that. I'd like to see more teams act on
Yep.
thoughts like that.
Yeah. There
Now,
are so many ways you can strengthen your own team. It's not just through the draft. It's not just through, free agency. Like, it's creative long-term thinking like that really separates, the men from the boys.
I have two questions for you on this.
Yes.
You're the Bucks. This is the framework. It's those three players plus your first and that second, and you make it work. Are you doing this to get Jimmy Butler? You already said you wouldn't give up a first for Jimmy Butler, but if Jimmy Butler says he's going to stay,
That does change things. Yes. But if I'm the Bucks, like, just before we get into that, can I just fire Doc Rivers first?
we need to figure out a way to get Tobias Harris to Milwaukee and reunite Tobias and Doc.
Yes. And Ben
Keep the
Simmons
vibes
on him
going.
in. Just get the whole band back together there. Okay.
Sign
No,
Gallo. Bring Gallinari
right.
back. Let's go.
So what is your question? I'm the Bucks.
Are you doing this? Like whatever framework it takes, it's your
Yes.
2031 pick. I mean, if you can pull it off without, I don't know how, but is Miami's leverage so, at such a deficit that if you can keep your first round pick, then hell yeah, like you're doing this.
Again, if we're assuming that Jimmy is kind of like, I'm staying.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm unsure of this because I don't remember every single minutia in the CBA. Could Jimmy theoretically already pick up his option now, or is there a trigger date?
No, he could pick up his option now.
Right. Okay, so that would be part of the negotiations. Like, if he did that now, like, yeah, I would relinquish that 2020 or 2030 first. Yeah.
So if you can guarantee Butler's on your team next season,
I mean, yes, if I'm the Bucks, yes, because here's the thing. Even Jimmy Butler knows he's not going to be the best player on that team. I think that's such a specific version, or not version. That's such a specific system. That's such a specific situation. That was the word I was looking for, where Giannis is still the number one guy. Like, there's no doubt about it. Milwaukee royalty. He's the main dude there. For Jimmy to come in and realize, yeah, I'm not the top dog in here. yes, I would gamble with that, assuming he picks up his option for next year. Absolutely, because I do think even Jimmy Butler is aware that Giannis Antetokounmpo is a better player. Yeah,
I agree, and just like given the level of health issues that Chris Middleton has started to deal with over the past few years,
yeah.
you almost kind of have to do this. If
Oh yeah,
if it's on the table and it can get done, I don't know. The arguments against it would be you don't want to short circuit your future if you think that there's any iffiness with Giannis or even Dame moving forward.
right.
The other two compelling things would be all right. Well, are you going to be able to afford to pay? Like, will ownership pay to keep Brook Lopez next year? Because by the way, if you're getting rid of Bobby Portis, Giannis Antetokounmpo is your backup five now. Like that,
Yeah,
like certainly in the postseason, right? And that's a, a responsibility they've over the past few seasons shied away from. So, and I mean, you could argue when it's Giannis and Portis, like whatever, that's fine. But now you're kind of removing the all right. Well, there's no like there's no sort of cover here, no safeguard. So
right.
I wonder if that factors in at all on top of just the okay, where are we going to be in 2031 of it all?
See, I subscribe to the roster construction ideology more so like 2 stars in depth, unless, of course, the team that I have in place, like OKC right now, who have legitimately 3 stars, like there's a significant runway on their some of their rookie contracts still. Like you can run with that until things get, too expensive and then you're struggling to figure out what to do there. But like, yeah, that's a conversation. That's such a specific situation. We can't really get into that. But like it's for for the Milwaukee Bucks rather to go all in on Giannis, Dame, Butler, and then have virtually zero depth. I mean, it's not like I believe in it. If I'm the Bucks, like that should have been your first question. Let's revisit this whole thing. Your question to me, if I'm the Bucks right now, is: do you think trading for Jimmy Butler is going to lead to a championship or even close to it? My answer will be no because of what I'm relinquishing.
Mhm. Yeah, but is it I guess going from Chris Middleton and Pat Connaughton to Jimmy
Right?
Butler is a
Yeah.
monster upgrade at this point.
It is absolutely. I'm not debating that whatsoever. But I'm also fully recognizing that Jimmy is looking for money in the future. So I'm probably gonna have to re-up him for a lot of cash because he's made that perfectly well known that he wants the bag. He's gonna be 36 this year. You have Giannis, you have Dame. Dame is also getting up there. Now I'm paying for 3 guys in their 30s, and what my mission is if I'm the Bucks is to build around Giannis. Like I need to produce a product around Giannis that optimizes him. Does that specific constellation of stars do that? I'm not sure I have the answer for that. I'm inclined to think no. But again, like you said, I think it's a perfectly valid and reasonable thing you're coming here with because, like you're saying, like they're paying a shit ton of money
Uh,
for Chris Middleton and he's struggling. Like you need to do something else.
Now, do you know what would be interesting about this? Because let's say Jimmy does, like, I think we're also all operating under the assumption, and maybe he would just pick up his player option, but we're all operating under the assumption that he'll get his max over the short term, in which case, if you trade for him, you have
Right.
$162 million committed to him, Dame, and Giannis next year. That's more than the salary cap is
Yes.
projected to be at. Next year's salary cap is a little under 155 right now. But like, and so when you could say, well, Chris Middleton also has a player option, but he's not going to command anywhere near. Is he going to be even
Right.
cheaper than you thought? Where you could say, oh, is he going to cost half as much as Jimmy Butler or close to it? And then you could say, well, would you rather have Chris Middleton at 60% of the cost of Jimmy Butler next year? Maybe that's worth a discussion. But also, couldn't Jimmy Butler, in theory, just not like look what happened with James Harden? Like I know Jimmy Butler, I think there'll still be more intrigue around him than there was in James Harden at the time. But look at the deal that James Harden got this year. Like, are we sure Jimmy Butler's even going to get $40 million a year if he opts out?
No, and obviously not. And I think that is, but that's the thing. That's where we're fighting the perception of Jimmy himself, right? Because even if no one is willing to pay him that, you could still see an argument where Jimmy see, okay, look, this market is just it's not there, so I'm going to pick up my player option, but then the market is going to be there the year after. Like there, I don't necessarily think that Jimmy is always dealing with the realities of a situation. And I think that thing could be something like that's a sticking point for him. Like it's been reported multiple times now. He went to Pat and was like, extension now, please, more money. So I think this is a very pressing issue for him. And if the Bucks are like, no, well, you can come here and then we'll see what happens. I don't think that's the approach. I think he wants the bag right up. Fair enough. Like I'm not going to blame anyone.
And
For
also, they can't play hardball if they've traded their last movable pick.
Yeah, exactly. But this is sort of a side point, but this is something I've been talking about on the pod for years alongside Brian. This is why I actually want my main guys to be some of the oldest on the roster, because it becomes so difficult. Like again, the Chris Middleton situation and the Dame situation. So you have Giannis who's 30. Now you're surrounding him with guys who are older, meaning they decline faster. Giannis is earning top dollar. These guys are lowering their trade values because they're getting older themselves. They're getting worse. It's such a difficult job finding new secondary stars who can run that same timeline with Giannis, for example. Like it's almost like, oh, we have to go out and get a guy like Dame who's a little past his prime. Like we have to go out and get a guy like Jimmy who's definitely past his prime. Like I do think there's so much value when you're rebuilding or just constructing a roster that if you have like a tier 1 superstar, that dude has to be one of your oldest players, because it just your secondary, your tertiary, your fourth guy, your fifth guy, then they're on that string age-wise where they're not going to decline on you all of a sudden. That's just unless something drastic happens, obviously. And that allows the effectivity of the number 1 superstar to be maintained for a longer period of time.
Any other Jimmy? So we both agree though that if you know Jimmy Butler's going to be there and you're the Bucks, you kind of have to do this. Even as well, they've played better since their poor start, so that's certainly a factor.
Yes. So what is your question? What
is there another team that just hasn't been discussed in the lexicon that you could just see kind of coming out of the woodwork? Because we've heard the Golden States, the Houstons, the Lakers have been tangentially mentioned. Is there just anyone? I've campaigned for Atlanta just to do it, especially if it's not going to really
make sense. Yeah, I like it. The Atlanta Hawks. Like I talked about this on a previous podcast with you where I brought up the Spurs just because if he's not a great fit, he can walk this summer. But again, that was a very modest return. I'm fully aware that Heat fans hated it. That's fine. I commented on that in the piece, basically saying, look, a deal for, I think the framework was Keldon Johnson, Zach Collins, and Trey Jones for Jimmy and Alec Burks. Because that's where I am. Again, I'm Mr. Safety. I don't want to give up something for what I consider to be potential blow up situation.
Would you give up that fake Charlotte Hornets first round pick that turns in 2 seconds?
Given that the Spurs have oodles of draft picks and so much incoming, I could probably be persuaded, even though in the piece I was like, no, I don't want to relinquish a first. I might be persuaded to give up a couple seconds, but like that one specifically, I could probably be persuaded for that.
We move on now out of Jimmy Butler land into the land of the Golden State Warriors, who Mort. So I think both before and then after a loss to the Toronto Raptors, we got comments from Draymond Green and Steph Curry that basically, I won't read them verbatim, but they emphasized the importance of the Warriors not over mortgaging the future to win now. This, of course, rubbed people the wrong way, because if you're not doing that, then what are you doing? Steph, then after their win over the Timberwolves, walked back those comments, basically saying in a nutshell, anyone who thinks he wants to be on an average basketball team is insane, and kind of telling Twitter turds to, shut the fuck up. My question to you.
Yeah.
What is the plan in Golden State then? Because look, the fact that honestly, if we really wanted to galaxy brain this, Draymond Green feeling this way might make sense, because if it wasn't for the emotional component, he's still really good on defense, but like he could in theory be one of the players leaving if you were trying to upgrade the roster. He in all likelihood won't be. So I won't galaxy brain it to that extent. But like Draymond and Steph feeling this way, I don't view them as non-competitors, and I don't fault them for it. If anything, it makes me look more closely at what a sham of a job Joe Lacob and crew are doing in optimizing their final windows. Because before I throw it to you, I'm not saying they should make a trade for the sake of making a trade and just deal everybody, all their picks, all their players under the sun.
Right.
But the fact that they're Steph and Draymond here, like, oh, we want to leave the organization in a better place than where it was when we came. You've already fucking done that by putting them back on the map. You have 4 championships, and Steph is not the Steph of a few years ago, but like he's still really fucking good. And as long as he stays healthy, he's probably going to make an all NBA team. And there's just something that's so futile and also insulting to your fans that you're not actually going for it. And I think what bothers me the most is if the messaging was they're waiting for the right opportunity and that hasn't presented itself, but instead we get this performative bullshit that they were trying to trade for Larry Markkinen, but they didn't want to give up anybody for him. And then they were trying to trade for Paul George by offering the Clippers long-term money, even though the Clippers' entire premise of letting Paul George walk was they didn't want long-term money on the books.
Yeah.
So I never viewed those quote unquote pursuits as legitimate. And then we're sitting here just looking over look at the players who are not good enough. And I agree with some of them. Pascal Siakam wasn't good enough. I disagree with that. Brandon Ingram wasn't good enough. Probably agree with that. Zach LaVine isn't good enough. If you're worried about not having to give up a ton of assets, maybe he is good enough, because I guess the Andrew Wiggins of it all complicates things, but like you're not going to have to mortgage your future for him. And so I don't fault Draymond or Steph for this one bit. I just think that, and I understand that fans don't want to see the Warriors decimate their future to not win a title right now. But like you have what is still one of the best, it's one of the best basketball players of all time, who is still close enough to being one of the best players in the NBA that you should be going for it. And I just find this to be, again, from the Warriors specifically, this is just such bullshit. Like I have no, I don't, Steph, Dre, they said what they said. That's fine. It's honestly, is that Steph's like character flaw here, is that he's never going to push the front office to do something. And that I do think, okay, you have your 4 titles. You don't need to prove anything, but like, then don't hedge either. If you're like, if you're just here to kind of ride out into the sunset, then you say that. And if that's the Warriors messaging, like, and the messaging has been inconsistent, because how many times has Jonathan Kuminga been available, but they don't want to part with him as just like kind of they view Brandon Podziemski as a future all-star. But they're involved in trade talks, or they're waiting on Giannis, even though they would never have the best trade package for Giannis, even if they put everything on the table. The only way, and now we can galaxy brain this, is are they waiting in the offing? They know something's going to crop up where it's Kevin Durant's going to want out of Phoenix and he's only going to want to go to Golden State, because that's a sweepstakes they could win. But then you're going to contradict yourself by mortgaging a good chunk of your future for a 36-year-old.
I mean, yes, I think they're open to that. Here's what I think happened ultimately. I think they drafted Kuminga. They drafted Moses Moody. They also drafted Brandon Podziemski. They drafted all these guys, and they were hoping, yeah, we can make this seamless transition with a young core where we have these blue chip prospects, and this is going to be a couple years where we make this transition. We allow Steph and Draymond to sort of like bridge that gap, and then they become like secondary, tertiary players, and then the next group is up. And then that never materialized. They realized Kuminga, while decent, is just not that guy. Moses Moody, they never had enough faith in him to play him extended minutes, at least not enough to really understand what they had in him. That's also why the extension for him was perfectly reasonable, because they got him for a freaking steal, as far as I'm concerned. If he goes to a second team now, I think he's going to look much better. Brandon Podziemski, up and down. Trace Jackson-Davis, an older rookie, not really a whole lot of potential there. And I think now they realized, okay, look, that didn't work, so we're trying to save money. And that's where your point about the performative bullshit comes in, because you're right. This is a team that desperately was like, oh, no, Clay, you're leaving? Oh, that's too sad. What are we supposed to do? Save money now? Oh, shucks. Well, so be it. We'll save money. I think that's where they are right now. I mean, they're not even projected, if I'm reading this right, to even be a tax team next year. Like they drastically diminished their tax bill this year. They're under 6 million below it actually. So like could they, if they find themselves bad enough next month, try to see if they can shed 6 million to get under the tax line? Because that would be the real proof in the pudding right there that they're not serious. But I do think, to your point about waiting for KD, that is the one I think. Like, I think they're basically saying we trust our market, we trust our popularity, we trust, the state of our franchise that is still viewed as, oh, recent champions. The last one won in 2022. I think that is what they're hoping for. That's what they're aiming for. They're hoping that someone lands in their lap. And if that's a 36, 37-year-old Kevin Durant, so be it, because you can sell that to the franchise, or sorry, to the fan base. And we also have to admit, Steph, KD together, even though they're old, almost as old as me, that duo still has some juice. Like, that's the thing. But I too have been really weirded out by why they haven't gone for it after they kind of realized, oh, Kuminga isn't it, Moses Moody isn't it, Brandon Pajemski isn't it, like why they haven't leaned into it. But I think the answer is just saving money.
Which I guess then is fine. And it would be really funny if they end up just like sending Dennis Schroeder to the Detroit Pistons, who could probably use a backup guard.
Yeah.
And we ducked the tax this year. Like, it doesn't that feel more likely than making a big trade? Because look, every name that's been mentioned, I'm not saying that, like, Jimmy Butler, not good enough, too old.
Right.
But like, who is the name? Is it just Kevin Durant? And in that case, what
well, you said the name. You mentioned the name. I'll tell you what the name is, because that was the one that never passed the smell test for me. When Zach LaVine was just constantly viewed, oh, the contract. You can't tell me, you can't convince me that Zach LaVine wouldn't be a great freaking fit on this team next to Steph.
The Warriors' offense is so bad when Steph Curry's off the floor. Dennis Schroeder has not fixed it. He's not been great for them. Like, yeah, he would have been a great fit. And I just... Now you're at the point where, oh, is Andrew Wiggins played too good? We can't give him up for Zach LaVine. And like, I kind of understand that discussion, but you also have not then done a good enough job, like developing your secondary wings to then take up that, like, a Moses Moody. Now Guy Santos is untouchable, apparently. I just don't like, I think I'm fed up with how phony and superficial and honestly aimless the front office is, because so at this point it's, okay, you're retaining all your future assets. How long until you're bad enough for those future assets to result in the type of player that you're potentially passing on now? Like, look, their 2025 first round pick could be anyone. It could be someone who's half as good as Zach LaVine. So I'm just like, I don't get it here. And I understand the salary matching of it all is complicated. And I understand the organic cycle of team contender windows. But like, now you're just sitting here pretending like you're operating on another like light years ahead or whatever. And really you're just like snake oil salesman at this point.
Yeah. Yep. It's a really good question in terms of what they should do. Like, if Steph goes out and pressures the front office, which I agree with you, he hasn't done, at least not from our knowledge, and not aggressively so. Like, who knows what kind of internal discussions they've had. What I wonder is, what's the play? Because I do think we have to acknowledge teams are pretty aware that Jonathan Kuminga isn't, that guy. Moses Moody isn't that guy. Like, their asset trove isn't really that attractive. So even if Steph did try to push them for something, what can they realistically do, Zach LaVine aside?
Well, I mean, I don't like, in terms of players, we're going to know the list of names that are out there, but I don't think they have the glitziest stash, but like, they can trade multiple first round picks. Like, even the 2030 pick they sent to Washington, they can trade like a pick that's protected that same year, 21 to 30. And like, so they could trade 3 real first round picks in my book, plus swaps, plus taking a flyer on Kuminga or Pods. Even Moody is movable with the poison pill just because his salary on that extension is so low.
Who is the best player they can get for that package? That's what I'm wondering. Because you also have to give up Andrew Wiggins for salary matching.
Couldn't you, in theory, get a Jimmy Butler or Zach LaVine without having to give up that type of package? It just becomes a matter of matching salary. And so if you're not going to go that route, and if the all-in play isn't going to emerge, and by the way, if the all-in play does emerge, in all likelihood, you're not going to get him because while I think their assets are a little bit better than you do, they're not going to be as good as many of the other teams that will be after whatever player you think. So why aren't they doing something like a Cam Johnson, where maybe it costs you a first round pick and a young player? Like, if you're worried about mortgaging too much of your future, why not only have to mortgage part of it and like get? But so that also doesn't pass the sniff test.
But does that make you? So I think we're miscommunicating a little bit, because I'm not trashing their assets. What I'm trashing really is the idea that they can just get someone, and that's not trashing you. It's just trashing the idea that is in place, that because they have trade assets, they automatically now have unlocked the ability to trade for Giannis, so to speak. Like, that is still not there. Like, what I'm wondering, I can rephrase it. Who is the best player they can get with those assets? Like, I know what you're saying. Like, oh, they can probably get Zach LaVine and Jimmy Butler without relinquishing those assets. Fully aware. But like, if they haven't done that, so we have to assume that they're either thinking bigger or trying something else. And what I'm wondering is, who's that guy out there who is perhaps available for that package? That's what I don't know. I don't have a name. Is that Kevin Durant?
It might be Kevin Durant. They'd be a sneaky De'Aaron Fox team if they're willing to put everything on the table.
Oh, yeah. If the Kings hadn't suddenly started winning again, I guess.
And partly without him. But yeah, I mean, like, he could, maybe they're worried about his next contract, or maybe he does want out based off that initial reporting. I wonder if they put everything on the table. Let's say every pick, at least.
Yep.
Could they get LaMelo Ball?
Oh, you're so asking the wrong guy about that, because I would not put all those picks in for LaMelo Ball.
Could they get, okay, and this is like, but maybe you use Dennis Schroeder as the matching money. Does Kobe White do it for you if you have to give up the equivalent of multiple firsts for Kobe White?
No. I think you have. I think the assumption here is you would use the contract of Andrew Wiggins, and all of the draft picks, and then right, they can aggregate. Sorry, so the contracts of Andrew Wiggins, Dennis Schroeder, what did that get you? That gets you to 39.2.
Hey, if they're still interested, they could probably get Paul George now, right?
Might even get some draft equity back. I mean,
that's messed up.
No, but like, it's just, I think it's so, like, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you that it's been performative. I agree with you that the plan is nonsensical, or at least not transparent. But I'm also just trying to play devil's advocate in the sense that I don't know who the player out there is.
What I will say then, though, is that it's a failure on their part because of all the name, like we've had like the Siakam stuff specifically. Like, all these players have never been good enough. And if those players, all NBA caliber players for the most part, have not been good enough to elevate you in your book, you should have been running and developing your team in a fundamentally different way than you have been.
You know what I really thought in terms of like when the Towns discourse when he was with the Wolves, like, oh, he's gonna get traded. I thought he was the guy that they were.
Well, but they weren't like, didn't they not want his contract or something? So Towns isn't good enough,
right? So and I think that's where things begins to fall apart, because if one of the best spacing big men of all time isn't interesting to you, knowing full well he's perfectly fine age-wise, everyone knew that his rebounding also would return to form after not playing next to Rudy Gobert. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm not shocked at his performance in New York this year whatsoever. I was like, yeah, makes sense. More feature role, like more opportunities.
And him next to Draymond, that would have been a really interesting defense.
Right. Like, that's, and the thing is, they've just, you're right. They poo-pooed everything that's come up. So either there must be some, galaxy brained idea in there that they're sitting on and just waiting to execute while Steph is approaching 40, I guess.
Yeah, are they waiting on the age 45 LeBron James to request a trade or something? I don't understand.
That's the guy, though. So that's the guy where maybe that's actually, I know you might be joking here, but like, I honestly think that might have been the goal, because there was that point last season, if you remember, where it was kind of a little bit up in the air whether he was going to return or not. Like, even last trade deadline,
Yeah.
There are some rumblings about, perhaps the Lakers should just explore the market a little bit. And immediately we heard, like immediately, oh, the Warriors are interested. So that might be the guy. So that's the, now
Yeah,
we
but
know what Golden
guess who's
State's
on a team
standard
that's
is.
better than you right now? LeBron James.
Right.
So I'm not saying that if, let's use Siakam or Towns as the example, that if they traded for those guys, that they would have won the title. But if you're trying to tell me that you were actually in on Larry Markkinen, so you thought he was good enough, but Jimmy Butler isn't good enough, like fuck all the way off it. Like that, here's my issue. If you think that the Warriors just shouldn't make a trade, they should prioritize the future and keep their assets, I think that's perfectly acceptable. I want better for their fans. I want Steph to want better for the team in general. I like that he has the confidence that he thinks maybe they could catch lightning in a bottle as currently constructed. I understand that entire perspective, but don't treat us, or don't try to treat your fans like a bunch of idiots. And that's what I think has happened here. And it's kind of shameful because I want to see Steph play in meaningful basketball games. And look, this podcast specifically, we said, oh, maybe the Warriors are going to be better than we thought at the start of the season. So yeah, there's ebbs and flows to all of this, but guess what? We are months removed from the 12-3. And now you're in danger of maybe not making the playoffs in the Western Conference. And so that creates the impetus of why would we make a trade when we're like already this low in this? It's just, they're just full of excuses. And I don't think they actually have a coherent plan in place, which whether it's with regard to Steph of today or the future of the franchise, that's what I think is most shameful.
You know what we need? We need them to trade for Rudy Gobert and then find out once and for all if teammates can get technicals or fighting with each other.
Julius Randle might be available if that does anything for them.
I mean, I was honestly, that might be
being facetious.
Well, see, I know you were, but I kind of think that might be the one team where you could sort of negate some of his weaknesses because of Steph and the gravity.
Maybe, but the problem with someone in his salary, and this is what I do recognize, that you need to be willing in most cases to give up Andrew Wiggins to get that guy. And I understand that Wiggins is critical to what you're doing, but we've also kind of seen this movie before. For like, you can't let Andrew Wiggins stop you from acquiring someone who elevates your ceiling. That's not Julius Randle, to be clear. But yeah, so I think we can move on to this item now, though. There are centers for sale.
Yeah.
So Mark Stein and Jake Fisher over at the Sideline / the People's Insider said that the following bigs remain actively available: Chris Boucher, the best big in the world; John Collins, Jonas Valanciunas, and Nikola Vucevic. Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype added Robert Williams III to the fold, and he also noted that it's going to take multiple seconds to get RW3 and Valanciunas. What do you make of this list? Who do you think commands the most? Who do you think is most likely to get moved? Who can make the biggest impact on a team? What are just your thoughts about this?
Well, again, you know how I'm Mr. Safety over here. If someone calls me and says, well, you're interested in Robert Williams III and it's going to take you multiple seconds, I'm politely declining because
I would do it.
I would not.
I am RW3 pilled from like half a decade ago, baby.
Don't get me wrong. I love him. It's a question of health. It's
right.
a question of availability. I have to take these things into consideration. If I'm a general manager and I'm relinquishing assets, I want to make damn sure that the guy I'm trading for is available. I can't trust that.
For multiple seconds, I would roll the dice.
Okay, so what is multiple seconds? Is it 2? Is it 5?
If it's 2, but like if multiple seconds is 5, the Jay Crowder special, as we call it.
Right.
No, I'm not like that's just
okay.
I mean, how many teams that aren't rebuilding even just have 5 seconds?
Right.
Like,
okay, fine. 2, if they're like projected to be low enough in the near future,
would you have done? Let's just say Phoenix's package for Nick Richards. Would you have given up that amount of second round equity for Robert Williams III?
That's a really good question because Williams is better than Nick Richards, but his availability sucks compared to Nick. So like, I feel that kind of evens it out. Yeah, I probably would specifically for Phoenix. Yes.
Oh no, I just meant in general. Like that's because Phoenix, the money to get there, they would have needed to move.
Manager, I probably would. But again, I I'm reiterating myself here. I'm Mr. Safety. I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare. Like I could trade him and he could go down after 6 games and I'm sitting there looking like a freaking idiot.
You're not for giving up 3 seconds. Like if you're
Oh wait,
sending
I'm
out a
also
real
getting one, right? I'm getting a
oh,
second
two and a
too.
half seconds.
So
Like
two,
whatever
two
you
and
want to
a half
call it.
seconds.
And the other thing here is Phoenix didn't send out, Josh Okogie had played for
Right.
them, but it wasn't if you're not sending out like someone who's really important to you. Like so if you're the Knicks
Yeah.
as an example, you could make the case that Robinson in seconds, even though Robinson's availability this year has been worse than RW3's, does that look bad because you're kind of trading one injury prone center for another one and someone who could be ultra useful if he's healthy? Like, so that might be a case where it's, oh, do you have egg on your face if RW3 gets hurt and you give up 3 seconds? But if you're just giving up matching salary to do it, I would go to 3 seconds. I would do it.
Look, we agree that he's played 53 games over the past 3 seasons. Like,
we agree, or can in this political climate, can I just claim that that's actually fake news and he's played in a couple hundred?
Alternative facts, true. Yes, I would just like to say he's averaging 17.7 games played on over the past 3 seasons.
Isn't that more than Joel Embiid?
Look, man, you know what? I'm going to stick with my gut here. My answer is no, because availability is so important to me if I'm building an NBA roster. And if I'm looking at how I'm managing the salary cap, I just can't justify it over myself. But again, that's me. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I know you'd pull the trigger, but you also a lawless maverick who plays by your own rules. So I respect the hell out of that. You're far more brave than I would ever be.
I would be like, I'd do something stupid. Like if I was Detroit, I'd be like, hey, you want that Toronto second round pick this year and just give us RW3? We'll take him into I would do something like that.
Yeah, no, I respect the hell out of it. And then if I'm playing you, I would just like laugh my ass off if he's injured again.
And even if he's not injured, he's probably giving you it needs to be the right team because he's not giving you more than 20 minutes per game on a regular basis. It's just not happening.
He's not, but those 20 minutes can be really good. Like I'm not going to diminish his play. Like defensively, I trust him. I think he's a far underrated passer. I think shot blocking wise, he's still got the timing. He's got the anticipation of it. He's still a great shot converter around the rim. Like I see the value there. And look, if this guy was averaging 40 games per year, hell yes, I would have done it immediately.
Do any of these other bigs tickle your fancy? Warriors have been linked to Vooch, by the way.
I like that one, by the way. I actually like that for him. I think that makes sense. I don't think it's the all-in move because he's not Kevin Durant, even though this year he's kind of shooting like him, which is wild.
Yeah.
Is
that how do you get there as the Warriors? Are you waiting for Dennis Schroeder to be aggregated on February 5th and trading him plus Looney to do it? Or because I think it has to be 3 for 1 if you're not giving up Wiggins otherwise, because you have Looney, Kyle Anderson, and Gary Payton II.
Yeah,
so those are kind of your.
Dennis Schroeder would work if you wanted to go that way.
Would you give up? But then I guess Dennis Schroeder's not played well, and you're viewing Vooch then as your offensive hub in the non-Steph minutes, which makes some sense.
Yeah, like why not?
So you would do that as them. So Nikola Vucevic is good enough, but not Karl Anthony Towns. I get it. That makes sense.
Oh no, I'm not saying I disagree with them, but like, yeah, no, it's wild, right? But Vooch he's such a weird animal right now because everyone seems to know that this is just a hot year. Like no one's anticipating this is going to, continue past this year because there's like a fairly long bit of Bulls history of him being extremely inefficient.
Right.
So I think teams are like, is this real? That's the one thing they're asking themselves when they're having this question about Vooch. Is it real? And whatever team is dumb enough to say, yes, totally real, this is the new Vooch, the Bulls should squeeze them, but I don't trust the Bulls to do that. So, yeah.
The Valanciunas, that's if you want to go really offense first, and you're probably not going to get a lot of stretch out of him, but he is shooting really well from 2 this year.
He's rebounding as always.
I mean, that could be a name that's interesting for the Warriors because it would be a small contract and then one of the mid ends that we just mentioned. So I don't know. I don't like the Lakers have been linked to him. Like, do you like any of these bigs? Actually, I would like Chris Boucher on the Lakers. I like Chris Boucher everywhere. Who am I kidding? But like, if you could get off of the Vanderbilt or Gabe Vincent contracts and get Chris Boucher, I probably wouldn't hate that as the Lakers.
Right. And I can also finally shut the mouth of Anthony Davis, who's always asking for a center. Like, I don't want to play center. I want to play power forward. Short guy. Fine.
Would you
Here's your
do
center.
so? You could get to Vooch's money pretty easily as the Lakers if it's only going to cost you second round equity, but I don't know if that's enough to get. The problem with the Lakers is so the money they're sending out just has multiple years left on it. So if it's
Right.
Vanderbilt and Vincent and a second, you need Chicago to like the idea of Vanderbilt and imagine him being healthy long term. I guess not outside the realm of possibility, but they're not going to trade Rui. Jalen Hood-Schifino has no real
Right.
value
Right.
as an asset, and you're not trading. You better not trade a first for Vooch. That would be
Honestly, see, this is where it's so difficult to project Bulls trades because I'm not even kidding. I know you're always laughing when I'm talking about the Bulls, just in regards to like their lack of ability to negotiate. But they're sort of like the Warriors in the sense that we have no idea what their plan it really is. We know they're limited in the fact that their management team isn't allowed to rebuild, nor are they allowed to go all in for a star, which kind of leaves them in the middle. We also have no idea what their sense of value is since they didn't even get a draft pick back for Alex Caruso. Like they're so all over the place that when we try to apply logic to what they should seek in a return, like, oh, would they be satisfied with only getting a second round pick alongside Jared Vanderbilt and Gabe Vincent? Dude, maybe they'll be fine with, maybe they'll be the one who adds the pick. Like, that's where we are. We have no idea. Maybe they'll be like, oh, we love Jared Vanderbilt so much. We're going to give you a protect first. Like, this team is so unpredictable that I can't sit here in good conscience and go, well, the Bulls should actually do this very logical thing because there's no logic connected to them. I have no idea what to expect. And any analysis towards what the Bulls are thinking and what the Bulls should do is completely pointless as to what they might up actually doing.
and I would be interested in. I know John Collins. I think he sidelined with a hip injury and has been
Yep.
for most of January.
He'd be fun on the Warriors too.
Do you think? Just because he's like a pure four, you can't really. I mean, maybe
love
they're
it.
a team where you view him
Doesn't
and
matter. I
Draymond.
love it. He can pick and pop. He can pick and roll. He's a lob threat. He rebounds. Like, look, Draymond can play the five, albeit small ball, but he like in the half court setting, like just I know they don't play a lot of pick and roll there, and that's the one thing that might make me hesitate a little bit. But short roll action with Collins playing the baseline, oh, it could be gorgeous. There's a world wherein that could be gorgeous.
Are there any other teams that you would like? Because he makes. I'm curious what the ask would be because Utah doesn't necessarily need more picks, and they're not a team that's we need to get off his money for next season. But he's also he does have his limitations. He is paid a good amount of money. I'd just be curious what the market would be for him and which teams could because he would be interesting in Detroit, like Tim Hardaway Jr. for maybe a second for John Collins, or is it just Tim Hardaway Jr. for John Collins?
I might go in a different direction.
But that would be, by the way, Detroit would have to view John Collins as like, we'll play him in one big lineups. And if you don't feel confident about that, you move on.
Let me just look up the salary for Collins. I don't remember it off the top of my head. I think it's like 26, right? 26.
I thought he was at 25 and a half or something.
26 and a half. All right. A little memory I have left in my golden years here. Okay, so that's probably going to be a little tough to find a trade. No, wait a second. So I was thinking the Raptors using Bruce Brown's expiring.
Ooh, that's interesting.
I kind of like that for him. I think they need someone. I like before the season. Before, by the way, I want to really flesh this out. Before Jakob Poeltl suddenly blew up and became much better than he was before, especially offensively, I suggested a deal. I think it was Bruce Brown and your Chris Boucher for DeAndre Ayton. Because I thought, all right, look, let's get a more offensive focused, center in there who also can play both sides of the floor. But now that Poeltl is playing the way that he is, I kind of want to stick with him. But I do think they need another interior scorer, someone who's a little bit more of a high flyer, someone who's just kind of reliant on others to score. Like, so someone who can be a lob target for both Quickly and Scotty Barnes and hell, even RJ Barrett. I wouldn't hate some type of framework there between Bruce Brown for John Collins.
I didn't think about them as a team. I guess that'd be, but you have, I mean, if you're Chris Boucher, you're going to move on from, but you do have Poeltl and Kelly Olynyk. So what is his role long-term there? But he would kind of combine like the stretch and the traditional big stuff. So that makes some sense. What What about San Antonio?
Yeah.
You don't sound
I
sure. You're free to say
No,
no.
I don't, because so obviously, as you're well aware, I watch a ton of San Antonio because of Wemby. I think you need Collins under those circumstances to lean into the 3-point shot a little bit more, and I don't think that's the right approach for him. I think
Okay.
I would prefer to find a team where he's actually leaning towards more so like being a lob threat than being overly reliant on the three, because San Antonio right now, they just need more spacing. Like I think offensively or from a scoring perspective, John Collins is where Jeremy Sohan probably is in a couple years,
Hmm.
but I like the ability of having Sohan handle the ball, defend at a high level. He's probing the defense a lot more. Like his ball handling is so much more evolved. I would like to stick with that if I'm San Antonio. What's a team
The
that really
Kings,
needs it?
that's been one that's mentioned all the time, is sort of the Kevin Herter and Trey
Yeah,
Lyles
yeah,
for
love it.
John Collins. Nice
Yeah,
little
that's a
reunion
good one.
between Trey and Utah.
Yeah, love that one. Love that one actually, because you know what? They need someone who can consistently get points off the attention given to others. Yes, love that. That's a good one.
No other teams are really like jumping out to me. He'd be interesting.
No,
Like if you just step laddered, like what if you just did all like kind of your expiring contracts and then whatever draft equity you need and put them on Houston?
oh, next to Shengun, who finally have a lob target, like, or not finally because he has
Because
Tari
they
Eason and
have
Amen
Jabari
Thompson,
Smith
but
there and Amen Thompson
yeah,
already, but like he definitely has more utility than a Jock Landale, Jeff Green, or Steven Adams at this
yeah.
point.
I'm wondering if he'll get enough shots to justify anything like his role,
Yeah, that's a good point. What about
especially
the
when you're paying him almost 27 million, because he's got to pick that option up next year, surely.
yeah, does it what about the Lakers? I just don't why are the Jazz gonna want their like do you move the
No.
protections on your 2027 pick to
And
entice
also,
them?
what does he fit? Does he fit like the stylistic play
Yeah,
of the
that's
Lakers?
I mean, you could just tell Anthony Davis, hey, John Collins is technically the center, even though AD is still the
Right.
center.
I'm still leaning Toronto on this one, because I think there's a fit there that makes some level of sense. You know what team he'll make the perfect sense on, but they just don't have like the contract, nor should you mess with the product that's working. I'd love him in Boston, just as some dude who comes in and just scores and does nothing more. Just like, all right, look, whenever I'm on the floor, I'm jacking up shots, I'm getting rebounds, and I'm trusting everyone around me to defend for my level. That's fine.
Two very quick questions here. First,
Mhm.
who among these bigs that we mentioned, these five, Jonas Valanciunas, Nikola Vucevic, John Collins, Chris Boucher, and RW3 are most likely to get moved?
I think there are more, but if you're asking me to literally pick one out of the litter, I'm going to say Chris Boucher because of the fact that he's an expiring contract.
Now, if I set the over under at 2.5 of these five bigs getting moved, are you taking the over or the under?
I'm actually going to go the over.
Wow, I'd probably go under. I'm not gonna
Well,
lie.
there's a reason. I have a selfish motive to that, because every single year I live stream the trade deadline, like in a studio setup. So I can't sit here and say I don't predict any trades, because then no one is going to tune in. I want people to tune in, so I'm rooting for trades, and that's why I'm taking this approach that I am.
Mort, unless you have anything else to add, are you able to just tell our listeners, viewers, where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you do?
Yes, you can find me over at Blue Sky at MSJ NBA. You can find me at Yahoo Sports. You can find me at Forbes. You can find me at Sports Illustrated, specifically Draft Digest. I'm also doing a bunch of Danish stuff that you probably wouldn't understand, which is totally fair. Oh, and also, do you mind if I pluck something? I have a promo code, Danis. Is it fine if I pluck that?
No, I absolutely mind.
You
Yeah, go
absolutely
ahead.
mind? All right, cool. So I'm actually partnering up with HelloFresh, who are doing these meal kits that are being delivered to your door. If you go in and type in buzzer beater in one word, you'll get a certain percentage off. Like, I know what you can get off in Denmark, but I found out today it's actually a code that works worldwide. So go into hellofresh.com, type in buzzer beater in one word, and you'll get a significant percentage off on your first meal kit.
that is exciting. And go follow Mort on all the social channels. The links to those will be in the podcast and YouTube description. Until next time, and as always, we leave you with the shout out to the one, the only, the hello freshest of the fresh, Mr. Frank Ntilikina.